Hello, everybody. Welcome to Amar's Game Chat. I hope you're all doing well and staying safe. I am Amar, and in conjunction to the predictions video for tomorrow's Nintendo Direct, I always do at least something to do with a bingo card for the Nintendo Direct to the Pokemon presentations, Pokemon Presents. So I figured, this would be my, add-on to that video where I'm just talking about what I've put on my bingo card for the Nintendo Direct. These are usually kind of separate from my predictions because not a lot of, but some of the things I put on my bingo card are also just like wants and like hopes that the direct would show, but I'm not really expecting them. There's a couple on here that, I think prediction wise probably isn't very likely, but if they happen, I can say I put it on my bingo card, and I think that'd be pretty cool. But yeah, so I hope you all enjoy this video just talking about this bingo card that I've created, and without further ado, let's get right into it. So I have 25 slots technically, but the Nintendo Switch 2 logo is my free slot just because I'm assuming there'll be Nintendo Switch 2 content there. I mean, they've already announced that there'll be Nintendo Switch 2 content there, so that's like a freebie in this sense. But the first slot that I have is the Metroid Prime 4, showing up here, Metroid Prime 4 Beyond. I think that is that's a given at this point, but I went a little bit further and I said that I think that it will release in November. In my predictions video, I said I think it will release on November 6th, 2025. So, this is kind of like the middle ground. I still think it's going to release this year, and that's why I put, November of this year, just because I don't think it's gonna slip. There's a bunch of announcements and like games that I have on the bingo card that I think are like releasing next year that I don't really know if Metroid Prime 4 has there's like a clear idea about where it would release next year in this sense, but I'm pretty confident it's gonna release this year. It could release in December, and I guess that's like what I'm battling with, like November or December, but I think they're going to try to release it as early as possible, and I think November 6th, which is the first Thursday in November, is the most likely. It's 2 weeks after Pokemon Legends ZA releases, and it is 2 weeks before Kirby Air Riders release, so I think that's a pretty good spot for it. I think honestly they probably do have a game for that slot, even if it's not Metroid Prime 4. I think they have a game for that slot, whether it's like a Nintendo Switch 2 edition or something smaller that they're going to announce in this direct. I do think, November 6th, I think we could put it down as a release day for Nintendo this year, which is pretty cool. But, obviously not guaranteed, but I think that slot would be Metroid Prime 4. The next slot that I put on my bingo card is a roadmap for Nintendo Switch Classics. I'm not sure if they rebranded on the Nintendo Switch 1 to call it Nintendo Switch Classics. It could just be called that on the Nintendo Switch 2, but I think we get a roadmap here. I don't think we're gonna get a roadmap for every single console that's on Nintendo Switch Online, just because I'm not really sure how much more they can add to like NES and SNES. They could add obviously a couple more Game Boy games, Game Boy Color games, and Game Boy Advance games. Obviously, they could add a little bit more N64 games and GameCube games. So I think we're gonna get at least some announcements related to the classic systems here. I wouldn't be surprised if we get like at least one announcement here, and it's for the GameCube, and it's like Super Mario Sunshine that they're adding for like the 40th anniversary, or Luigi's Mansion, like they announced that's coming out next month for Halloween or something like that. But if I had to like make a guess, I think for like bingo card purposes, if any announcements for NSO shows up here, that slot is taken, just because it gives us a little bit more of a roadmap of what they're doing. But I think, for like myself personally, I think we get like maybe one GameCube announcement, and then one N64 announcement, and then maybe one Game Boy announcement, original Game Boy, because I think they're gonna at least maybe want to have at least like one announcement that is for like the non-expansion pack tier, And I think that'd be Game Boy, because the Game Boy Advance is also on the expansion pack. So I think that's it. We don't see like the Sega systems on this graphic, but I don't think they're gonna add, like, I don't think they would announce the Sega games in this direct just because, obviously it's not really their games. I think, but that's something that I think they can announce on social media separate, and it could be its like own hype and own buzz and everything like that. The next one is not really a prediction, but it is more so a want from this direct, or just from Nintendo at some point this generation, and that is a new Star Fox being announced. Um, I honestly think Star Fox Zero is pretty cool. Obviously the controls are a little weird, but I think any Star Fox game would be pretty cool. I've kind of moved away from them doing like Star Fox Adventures, like a GameCube port of it. Because I think they're gonna want to do that just for they're gonna want to add it to NSO, and then I think it becomes a little weird if you're about to release Adventures and then maybe like a year later you add it to NSO. Um, you know, Obviously, I think if it's released separately, it does have certain enhancements that take advantage of like the controls and everything. But I think I've kind of moved away from them doing an old Star Fox game in favor of them doing a new one. And obviously in like the sense of this bingo card, anything Star Fox showing up gets that. But my preference would be a new Star Fox game. As of next year, it will be 10 years since Star Fox 0 released, and I believe it will be next year will be 8 years since Star Fox 2 released on the SNES Classic. So I think we are, bound to get a Star Fox game this generation. We didn't get one. We didn't get a full Star Fox game on the Switch. We technically got Star Fox expansion with Starlink, but I think we are bound to see something Star Fox here. I mean, not here, but at some point in the generation. It'd be nice if it's here, because I'm kind of expecting this direct to give us a little bit more than a normal direct would. Obviously, the 60 minutes that its runtime does tell us that it may be doing that, but I do expect to see something like a little more long lasting here than what we see like in previous directs, where they only cover mainly 6 months. I wouldn't be surprised if we see one game that's like next holiday or even an early 2027 game. And that could be Star Fox, because Star Fox Zero did release in early 2016 or 2016. But I think one game here that is 2027, Star Fox kind of fits that. Because with the other games I have on this bingo card and in general from Nintendo, I think Nintendo's 2026 would be pretty full already. At least for like the first half of the year. So Star Fox, that'd be pretty cool. And then I have another wish prediction right here, or like wish bingo card entry, and that is a new Pilot Wings. I don't know. I mean, I was kind of expecting them to do Pilot Wings to start the generation, because that's what they normally do. I believe the SNES version of Pilot Wings, Pilot Wings 64, and Pilot Wings Resort all came out at launch for their respective consoles. So maybe we've already gone past that point of them doing a Star Fox game. I mean, not Star Fox game, a Pilot Wings game. But I still think it'd be pretty cool if they did one. They could implement the mouse controls in some way into it, like with maybe how you're looking around. And it would be cool if they went back to Woohoo Island. We're gonna get to it a little bit while, because I'm giving a little bit of commentary to each of these. But Mario Kart DLC, could they add like something to do with Woohoo Island? Because Woohoo Island technically did have a couple of different state courses in I believe the Wii game and the 3DS game, and then obviously there was Woohoo Loop, or not. There was the battle map that was also in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. So they're clearly, as of at least the beginning of the Switch generation, they were still thinking about Woohoo Island. And so a new Pilot Wings that explores, a fully HD Woohoo Island, maybe teases a Nintendo Switch Sports 2, if they don't do a Nintendo Switch Sports, Nintendo Switch 2 edition. But yeah, Pilot I don't really have many more of these like predictions, like hopes that a direct will one day give us. Outside of these two, the last slot I do have is saved for something like that. But once we get to that point, we will talk about that then. The last slot of this row is Animal Crossing. It has been 5 years since Animal Crossing New Horizons. It's been over 5 years. It's been closer to 6 years now. And well, maybe in a couple days to be closer to 6 years, but we are, nearing the 6th year anniversary of Animal Crossing New Horizons. So, it's not impossible for them to have been working on an Animal Crossing for the last couple of years and be ready to show it. This is a game that I could see, again, being like the 2027 game that they could show off here, just to tease, give a little bit more of a broader roadmap of what's ready, like what's coming to the Nintendo Switch 2. But in the predictions video, I did say I think like the closer, like there's gonna be a closing segment of the direct, and I think it's gonna be like we're gonna end on like a 3D Mario from like a 40th anniversary section, and then they are gonna come back and say, we have a little bit more to show you all. Please stay tuned until the very end. And they have like the full reveal trailer and like official trailer for Splatoon Raiders. And then they said they have one more announcement, and I think that would be Animal Crossing. Just because I think, this is a game that would, like, if anybody has been thinking, going back and forth on if they would want Nintendo Switch 2 during this generation, I think Animal Crossing needs to be the one announcement that's going to get, like, many people to want to go buy Nintendo Switch 2. And that's not really something they need to do right now. So that's why I think it's going to be a teaser. It's not going to be anything big. Next year they could do, like, the full reveal of Animal Crossing on the Nintendo Switch 2. And just talk about it, just show it off, tell everyone that it is coming to Nintendo Switch 2 in summer of 2027, maybe in like a June direct next year. But yeah, I think if there's one tease here, I think it'll be Animal Crossing, which will be very, very fun. So the next two are release date announcements. So Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment. I think that's going to release in February of 2026. And then I put, my bad. I don't happen to Rhythm Heaven. Rhythm Heaven should be here. I don't know what happened. It was right here. Rhythm Heaven was right here. Let me fix that. I will be right back. All right, so I have fixed it. Apparently I just didn't have them like on the singing mode, but I do want to discuss both of these together because I think both of them are going to release in February. I wasn't as confident in Rhythm Heaven. That's why I didn't say February. I think it is going to get a release date in this direct, but I think they both release in February. I think Rhythm Heaven releases late February and Hyrule Warriors releases like early mid-February. To me, that makes sense just because we are, that would be one Nintendo Switch game and then one Nintendo Switch 2 game. They're both exclusives. So I think that makes sense. I could see Rhythm Heaven also releasing in January, but I don't think it's going to go looking at when it was announced in March of this year, I don't think that we are going to wait like an entire year from the reveal for it to be released. Just because, mainly because it's a smaller game, so it's not necessarily something like that they have to like show off in like multiple directs to show a lot of it. Obviously, I could be proven wrong. There could be like a huge new mode to Rhythm Heaven Groove that warrants like a later release date, but right now I think it is a smaller game. I think it is a good game to start the year off with. Outside of January, they could put in January, but I think February with Hyrule Warriors and Rhythm Heaven fits pretty well. And yeah, so I think they're both going to show up in this direct. Of these like slots I've already put, I think these four right here are probably the things that I feel the best about. Animal Crossing would be next, and then I knew Pilot Wings and Star Fox aren't really, they're just really wants and hopes, opposed to totally new, something that I feel really confident in showing up in this direct. But yeah, I think we get a Rhythm Heaven release date, and I think Hyrule Warriors is also dated in this direct, and I think it is in February. of next year, 2026. All right, so the next thing is the Fire Emblem genealogy of the Holy War. This has been a rumor for a very long time, for I think at least 3 years now, that Nintendo has been working on a remake for the game, Fire Emblem 4. We haven't seen it in all that time, but I do think it is real, and I think it is coming out. And this is why I put like all three of these in a row. I think Fire Emblem is coming out January of next year. I think they're gonna follow the Engage release path, where they announced Engage in September of 2022, and it released in January of 2023. I think they're gonna kind of follow that here as well, and just they're gonna announce it here. They're gonna show it off. They're gonna give it a new trailer. They're gonna do a couple trailers over social media over the next couple months. Maybe they announce DLC at like the Game Awards or something, like they did with Engage. And then it will release in January. I was going back and forth on, do I think it'll be Fire Emblem Holy War, like Genealogy of the Holy World remake, or a totally new game? Because next year, January next year, we will be 3 years removed since Engage released. So, we could be in store for another Fire Emblem game at that point. But I think we have one more game before the next major mainline Fire Emblem game comes out. I think that is Fire Emblem 4, whole Genealogy of Holy War remake. They'll probably call it like Fire Emblem Echoes, and then like Genealogy of the Holy War, or Fire Emblem Echoes Genealogy, or something like that. But remake, I think it is real. I think we are gonna get it in this direct, and I think that'll be very cool. That'll be a very cool middle of the direct announcement, because I didn't really specify on here. That's mainly something for like predictions, but I think like Metroid is the opener, completing like the opening, the opening, middle, closer era of it. It started as a closer in its re-reveal in June of 2024 last year, and then it was the middle of both the Nintendo Switch 2 Direct earlier this year and the March Direct earlier this year. And then I think it completes its saga before it releases to being the opener of this direct. But I think that would make Fire Emblem a good middle segment for this direct. Like if I was speaking in that terms, I think these three right here, the classics, Rhythm Heaven and Hyrule Warriors, I think those are like just like headlines. Maybe Rhythm Heaven gets like a little bit of a bigger trailer, but I think at least the classics and Hyrule Warriors would be headlines. Release date, and then maybe like a new classic being added to Nintendo Switch Classics. So this one is kind of out there a little bit, just because it would technically be Nintendo announcing 4 retail releases for Nintendo Switch 2 in a very short amount of time, I think. But I did say 4 or more Nintendo Switch 2 editions, which are Nintendo Switch games that do get upgrades to the Nintendo Switch 2 in some way, like fidelity, or adding like new features, new modes to it. I mean, I think there's a chance that we get 4 here. In the Nintendo Switch 2 Direct, they announced 5. They announced the 2 Zeldas. Actually, they announced more than 5. They announced 6. We got the 2 Zeldas. We got Super Mario Party Jamboree. We got Kirby in the Forgotten Land, and we got Pokemon Legends EA and Metroid Prime 4. I think they could do I think they could have 2 that are announced here, that aren't connected to the 40th anniversary of Mario, and then 2 that are. I think like in the sense, it'd be like Pikmin 4 and Nintendo Switch Sports. I think those are like 2 pretty easy predictions for Nintendo Switch 2 editions, and then Super Mario Bros. Wonder and Super Mario 3D All-Stars being the other 2. And then I said or more. I mean, we could get a couple of third-party Nintendo Switch 2 editions, something like that. But I think 4 is a good number. Maybe I could have made it 3, but I think 4. I think that'd be a pretty exciting announcement if they had, or like when we're looking back at the direct after the fact, 4 new Nintendo Switch 2 editions. I think that'd be pretty cool. And then the last slot for this row is Camelot. I think Camelot is announcing the new game here. It by the time it probably releases, it would have been anywhere from 4 to 5 years since Camelot released their last game. And Camelot isn't necessarily a studio that needs like a super long announcement period. Like the two sports games that they announced during this generation, the Switch generation, they both were announced in the early parts of that year and then released in like the middle to end of June. So, anywhere from like 5 to 6 months, 4 to 6 months of hype and like being a marketing cycle. I could see them doing something like Mario Baseball, which normally is a Bandai Namco game, but I could see Camelot, taking a swing at something like that instead of like going back and doing a new tennis game or a new golf game. A new Golden Sun is also on the table. They just added a Golden Sun soundtrack to Nintendo Switch Music, or Nintendo Music, not Nintendo Switch Music, Nintendo Music. You need Nintendo Switch Online for Nintendo Music, but they just added a new Golden Sun soundtrack. So maybe there's a little bit of a tease, maybe a little bit of a, they're pushing, Nintendo's pushing us to get a little bit excited about Golden Sun again because they're announcing a new one within the week. But I think something from Camelot makes sense. It makes a lot of sense here. If it is Mario related, again, I think that ties in well to the 40th anniversary. To have a couple of Mario announcements. But, like we could have Nintendo Switch 2 edition announcements. We could have the sports game announcement or like whatever Camelot's working on, if that's Mario related. And then we could have like something a little bigger, as I will talk about in a little bit because it's on the bingo card. The next slot is a third-party slot. So it is the first of, I believe, 4 third-party slots that I put on here. Normally I try to do like 80% first party and like the rest of 4 or 5 depending on if I really needed the middle slot. I try to make 4 like third parties. So the first third party one is, I think, Professor Layton and the New World of Steam. I think that's what it's called, New World of Steam. It is currently slated for this year still, but I don't think it is going to release this year. I think they are going to push it to next year. I did put spring 2026 just because I think, I don't know if it's going to release early next year. I think it is still a Switch 2 exclusive, and a Switch and a Switch 2 exclusive, and I think it will stay that way. And I don't think they're going to want to compete with anything Nintendo is doing early next year. Because again, I right here I have 3 different Nintendo Switch games I think are going to release early next year. So I think pushing it to like the end of March, early April would make sense. Because it is going to be a big game. I think it is going to sell a good amount of copies. So I think Nintendo probably encourages Level 5 to push it a little bit. And then Level 5 actually may need a little more development time on it. So I think that makes sense. I'm very excited to see it though. I'm very excited to see all these games. I'm expecting a big trailer for Metroid Prime 4. I'm expecting, at least a segment on Hyrule Warriors. A segment on Rhythm Heaven Groove, a trailer for Fire Emblem, stuff like that. A couple of smaller trailers for like Nintendo Switch 2 editions. A trailer for Camelot's next game. So I expect a lot of trailers here. So this is probably, we have like 3 or 4 big announcements here. I think this is the second one, like of the, I guess maybe Star Fox is number 5. We'll have to see. When we finish the bingo card, talking about the bingo card, we'll come back and just give a little bit of like an outro of just talking about them really quickly. But Luigi's Mansion 4, we are in the same spot like we were with Camelot, where we are just over now 3 years since Next Level Games released their last game. So I think it does make sense, even if it's not releasing this year, and I'm not expecting it to release this year. This could be one of those titles that are a little more long lasting, that like comes out like maybe around a year after this direct airs. But I think Luigi's Mansion 4 does make sense. Again, we are 3 years and a couple months removed since Mario Strikers Battle League released, so I think it makes sense to have Luigi's Mansion here, and or whatever really Next Level's working on. I'm committed to Luigi's Mansion 4 being their next game. It could be again like Punch Out, but I think it makes sense like for them to do Luigi's Mansion because that's something that like Nintendo knows is going to be a massive seller, and like it will be, you know, pretty good inherently, and then something a little bit like different. Like I think it's good that they're switching between like because I also believe they did Metroid Prime Federation Force, so they go from Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon to Metroid Prime Federation Force to Luigi's Mansion 3. I think they helped on Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon, the remaster that released last year, but before that they even did Mario Strikers Battle League, and then next year or something they do another game, and like I think that's Luigi's Mansion 4, and then after that they could do another game. What am I expecting from Luigi's Mansion 4? I'm expecting it to be a little more open. Maybe there's multiple mansions, but this time technically Luigi's Mansion 2 also had multiple mansions, but this time you can like walk to those mansions. Like there isn't like they're all much more interconnected in some way. I think that'd be pretty fun. The next slot is a re-release from the Nintendo 3DS or Nintendo Wii U. This is leaning more towards the Wii U because I think this slot will be taken by Poochie and Yoshi's Woolly World, which is also a 3DS game. That title is from the 3DS game, but I do think Woolly World will show up here as a 3DS game, and not 3DS, as a Switch game that will release on the Switch and just be backwards compatible with the Switch too. I think that makes sense for them to do that. You know, Nintendo Switch does need probably a couple more games, depending on how long Nintendo is planning to support it, because we have at least 2 more releasing next year in Tomodachi Life and Rhythm Heaven Groove. So I think it makes sense to maybe have 1 more announced here, and then maybe like next Direct announce like another one, and then they progressively really start slowing down the release pipeline for the console. But you know, Woolly World, and then I also included the 3DS because I think Planet Robot could show up here, but there's been a lot of discussion about is there too much Kirby right now, and personally I do not think there's too much Kirby, especially on the Switch, because none of the Kirby projects this year released on the Switch. So I think it makes sense, you know, if Nintendo wanted to do another Kirby game, for it to be primarily like focused and advertised as a Switch game that's backwards compatible with the Switch too. But at the moment, technically Nintendo's already acknowledged that Woolly World could be coming to the Switch with the Switch 2 announcement, and that like it being like as like a little bit of a game that they kind of showed on the backwards compatibility screen. Was that a little bit of a mix up with the Crafted World and not Woolly World? You have to see, but I think Woolly World probably does eventually come to the Switch or the Switch 2 at some point. So the other game, and I know it's kind of surprising I put it in the same row as Luigi's Mansion 4, but the final game for this row is a new 3D Mario. I know, you know, they just released Donkey Kong Bonanza, that studio, or that team at Nintendo. But I don't think they're going to be waiting that long to do a new 3D Mario. And again, this is the 40th anniversary of Mario, so I do think it makes sense, at least to announce 3D Mario this year. Again, maybe it's not releasing for around a year after this Direct airs, but I think it makes sense. I could see a world where they do Luigi's Mansion 4 here, and then if they do an early Direct next year, like an early year Direct, that's where they announce 3D Mario and like tie it in more with like the movie, which I don't have anything about the movie on this bingo card, but I do think we see or hear something about the movie in this Direct. But and maybe they could tie it in there, but I think it would just make sense. I mean, if you're doing a Mario segment in this Direct, which it seems like they may be doing, why not end it on 3D Mario? Like at least that segment, because again, I predicted that actually won't be the closer, and they'll do like a 3-pronged closer. But again, I think 3D Mario would be pretty cool. Like, I think, you know, of these 4, or at least of these, right now, of these 4, Star Fox, Animal Crossing, 3D Mario, and Luigi's Mansion, I think Luigi's Mansion, honestly, I think Mario and Luigi's Mansion are the most likely, and I would honestly lean towards 3D Mario just because of the anniversary. So this one is also tied in to the anniversary, and that is Mario Kart World DLC. Nothing big. At least I'm not expecting anything big for DLC wise from this direct. I think they're gonna announce the game's getting DLC and maybe show like what's the first pack. But I don't think we're gonna like have it after the direct. Like I don't think they're gonna release after the direct or anything. Um, I was going back and forth on what I think it would be. I think it's possible, as I mentioned earlier, something maybe returning to Woohoo Island, and they add like those courses back, and maybe like one of the battle stages, and they maybe add a couple more courses that are based around the island. But I also included Donkey Kong here because I mean, Donkey Kong Bonanza is about 2 months old now at this point. Um, it could make sense, it would make sense depending on if they also acknowledge some of the spoilers from Donkey Kong Bonanza for them to maybe release some DLC with like this long. Maybe they add Diddy Kong, Dixie Kong, Funky Kong, Cranky Kong, King K. Rool, like different characters from the Donkey Kong franchise into Mario Kart World, and I think that makes sense. Maybe expand the map again to add a whole Donkey Kong island and locations and stages and courses and battle maps and everything. But yeah, I think we hear about Mario Kart World. I think they inevitably do have at least one Mario announcement here, just because I don't think they're doing this direct on on September 12th, the day before the 40th anniversary, just for no reason. They normally don't do Nintendo Directs on Fridays. So I think they're doing it for a good reason. I think that is because they have some Mario news here, and at least one Mario game announcement. And then the next one is kind of being teased here because I guess I didn't toggle the visibility on everything in there. But 2 Resident Evil games are out before the end of 2025. We have 3 months. So that's a little bit of an ambitious prediction, but we already have a couple of the games as cloud games. We have Resident Evil 2 as cloud, Resident Evil 2 Remake, and Resident Evil 3 Remake. And then we also have Resident Evil 7 and 8 as cloud versions. I'm not sure we have Resident Evil 4 Remake as a cloud version, but I think it makes sense to get like Resident Evil 7 and Resident Evil 2 Remake out as like native Switch 2 releases this year. But I'm not saying like they're just going to announce those 2. I think they announce all of the cloud games are getting native versions. And then they also end that section off by saying some future Resident Evil games will also be coming to the Nintendo Switch 2. And that's a little bit of a nod to like Resident Evil 9, Requiem, and anything else, like another remake from Resident Evil. That and like Resident Evil 4 remake, like a nod to like those games will also be coming out eventually on the Switch too. But yeah, a little bit of an ambitious prediction, but I still think it's possible, depending on what other games are announced in this direct that may be releasing this year. And to go along with that, what other third-party games could be releasing? Baldur's Gate 3. It's a game of the year from 2023. I think it makes sense for it to come to Switch 2 at some point. I believe the first 2 Baldur's Gates are already on the Switch, because obviously I think they're a lot older than Baldur's Gate 3, so they could probably run a lot easier. But I think it makes sense, for the Switch 2 to get Baldur's Gate 3. It just released on the I believe, I'm not sure. No, that happened at the end of the Game Awards, but it released on other platforms off the PlayStation at the Game Awards in 2023. So again, I think it makes sense for Baldur's Gate 3 to come to Nintendo Switch 2. I think it'd be a pretty fun addition to the lineup of Nintendo Switch 2 games. And yeah, another third-party announcement that I'm predicting here. But I do have one more announcement here, like right in this slot, that does say 3 more third-party games. So we'll get to that just in a little bit. So the next slot is Tomodachi Life Living the Dream. Spring 2026. I think that is when it's going to release. Around like April, May, maybe June, maybe early June. But I think it's going to get a pretty big trailer here. I think this will be a big trailer for it, because I don't think they're going to do like another trailer in another. Well, the thing is with here is just like with like Rhythm Heaven or like And do I have another game on here that well, okay, so just like with Rhythm Heaven, I think it either shows up here and it gets a big presence and it doesn't show up in another Nintendo Direct with a huge presence, or it shows up in another Nintendo Direct with a huge presence and not really here. Maybe it's mentioned here, but I don't think these. I don't think like Tomodachi Life and Rhythm Heaven have two showings in the like upcoming Nintendo Direct. I think it's either this one or the next one, and I think this one's the one for Tomodachi Life just because they teased it at the end of the last Nintendo Direct in March. So I think it makes sense to show it off again, give it a huge blowout. Announce some new features, some new, everything to do with the game. Maybe they bring back the Mii Maker, except like options that they had from Miitopia, the Miitopia remake. And I think it releases in spring 2026. I could have said just trailer, but I think it's going to come out a little bit later than March of next year. And then we have the like another Mario announcement, and I think that is Mario 3D All Stars is returning. And this kind of goes along with the Nintendo Switch 2 editions, because I do think they may bring back like the original game just to market for both Switch and Switch 2. But I think there will be a Switch 2 edition associated with it, and I think it will be Galaxy. They will add Galaxy 2 to the game. Maybe it's like a $10 or $20 expansion, but I think they add Galaxy 2, and then they maybe, I'm not sure if there was anything in the games that tied it exactly to the 35th anniversary, but they would change those things to maybe just make it like a Mario anniversary title as a total. And the other thing with like it being back is, do I think it will show up, like be like a permanent title on the Switch? I don't know, because technically I think we're gonna have at least one more anniversary for Mario before this generation ends with the 40th anniversary, and that could be another opportunity for them to bring it back. But I don't know. Like it could take it away again on March 31st. But I also think since it's gonna have a Nintendo Switch 2 edition, it makes sense for it to stay around now, and then again make it like a huge anniversary title that like spans the next couple of years. But yeah. That's not really what I'm predicting here. I'm just predicting he's going to come back. And then the first one of the last row is a new IP revival, like an old Nintendo IP revival. I have Ice Climbers and Balloon Fight here. I don't think those two are getting revivals, but something that hasn't gotten a game in a while, something like what we got with like Another Code in the September 2023 Direct, and they released last January in 2024. Something like that, or even, I wouldn't necessarily Mario vs. Donkey Kong was an old revival, but we hadn't gotten a game in a couple years with Mario vs. Donkey Kong. So something that, was unexpected and it hasn't gotten a game in, I would say maybe like 10 years, shows up in this Direct and gets a new entry. Something like Tomodachi Life would have been that if they saved that for this Direct. Pilot Wings would be like that. Star Fox would kind of be teetering on that. Something like that. I think it'd be pretty cool. But for me, that would be the last slot that I have here. You know what? I'm just gonna bring that one up. Kid Icarus is back. That would kind of fall into that. I'm not sure they would ever do anything with Kid Icarus again, especially with Sakurai, Mr. Sakurai working on Kirby Air Riders right now. So it makes sense that they probably aren't doing anything with Kid Icarus. But like an Uprising like 4K version that uses the mouse controls, I think that'd be pretty cool. Or just like a version that releases on Nintendo Switch and has backwards compatibility with the Switch too. I think that'd be pretty cool as well. But I wouldn't mind, Nintendo should do another Kid Icarus at some point. But I don't know. I don't know if they would do that. At least not now. But that is a want. That is the last want that I have here. The next spot is Pokemon Ranger for the Nintendo Switch 2. This one is kind of based on the rumors that we've been hearing recently that they will be announcing a Nintendo Switch-ish, like a Nintendo Switch 2 or Nintendo Switch spin-off for the Pokemon series. I think it makes sense for it to be Pokemon Ranger just because I think they can implement the mouse controls into that pretty well. And that could be really fun. But I wouldn't mind any type of spinoff from the Pokemon series. A new Pokemon Rumble would be great. A new Pokemon Mystery Dungeon, or like a remake of an old Pokemon Mystery Dungeon would be great. A new Pokemon Conquest would be great. You know, those are things I always predict for Pokemon Presents, and they never really happen. But now it could be happening in Nintendo Direct. So I think that's very, very exciting. And then the last two slots, because we'll just do them because they are both smaller slots in the grand scheme of things just for this bingo card. I think Splatoon Raiders does get a new trailer here, and I do think it's a part of that three-pronged closer that I was talking about earlier, where it goes from 3D Mario to a full reveal of Splatoon Raiders, and then a teaser trailer for the next Animal Crossing. I think it's gonna get a full reveal here. You know, it makes sense. I don't think the thing with like how they revealed it in June, with it being around the anniversary, it obviously does make sense, but I also don't think they would have revealed it then if they weren't, like, if it wasn't coming out within the next like year or so. So I think we're gonna see it again here. I think it's gonna get this full reveal, and they're gonna talk about it a little bit. You know, why, like, maybe not how this game came about, but like what the story is. You know, some of the plot details. They're probably gonna confirm it's a single player focused game, stuff like that. And then the last slot is the final third party slot as well, and that is 3 or more Square Enix games. I mean, I think it'd be pretty cool if they had 3 Square Enix games here. We already have a sense of probably at least one that's going to show up here in the former Final Fantasy VII Remake, because it does need a release date for the Nintendo Switch 2. So I do think it makes sense for that to show up here. But I also think, you know, something like Dragon Quest 1+2 HD 2D showing up makes sense. You know, we had the Adventures of Elliot also announced in the last partner showcase, and Octopath Traveler 0 announced, so those could show up here. Something with Nintendo crossover could show up here. Like, there's a lot of options for Square Enix for a direct like this, so maybe 3 is a little, maybe 3 or more is undercutting it. Maybe I should put like 4 or 5 Square Enix games showing up here. But we'll have to wait and see. You know, I think I mentioned Final Fantasy VII Rebirth could show up, like as like the next game that Square Enix will be releasing, like following from Final Fantasy VII Remake. So again, a lot of options for Square. I wouldn't be surprised if there's even more than 3 games that they show off here, and maybe they show off more than 3 games and they announce 3 games and like 6 games show up. I don't know, but that is my whole bingo card for this Nintendo Direct. You know, 24 hopes and predictions for the Direct. But yeah, you know, again, I think like the big games here would be Splatoon, Mario, 3D Mario, Luigi's Mansion, Star Fox, and Animal Crossing. And I think 2 of those happen. I think we get 2 big games, maybe not those specific, like 2 from that specific range, but something like Monolith could show up here. Maybe a new Fire Emblem could show up here. Maybe Nintendogs would be big in terms of not really like a big, like in the sense of like a Zelda, but like in like a more casual game. Nintendogs would be pretty big. That goes along with like something like Animal Crossing. Tomodachi Life is big on its own. I don't think a new 3D Zelda is going to show up here. I mentioned Zelda, but I don't think a new 3D Zelda is going to show up. You know, Smash, again, I think Smash is probably like a year or 2 out, unless they're doing a Nintendo Switch 2 edition. So I think, you know, at that point it would make sense to do a Smash Brothers. But Sakurai is working on Kirby Riders. I think he's gonna want to work on this like, even this might be the final Smash of his career for all we know. I think he's gonna want to go out and do something special with it, even if it's not like the everyone is here catchphrase that they just did with Smash Ultimate. And you know, there's other properties. I mean, Metroid Prime 5 could be announced. They probably won't ever do something like that in this Direct if Metroid Prime 4 hasn't been released yet, but Metroid Prime 5 would be big, you know, to even announce for Metroid Prime 4 releases. Pikmin 5 would be pretty big as well. But that is all I have for this bingo card. You know, I had a lot of fun making the bingo card, you know, because this is the first Nintendo Direct of the Nintendo Switch 2 post Nintendo Switch 2 release era. So a lot of cards are on the table again. You know, a new 3D Mario, a new Animal Crossing, Luigi's Mansion 4, Splatoon 4, Pikmin 5, things that as we were getting to the end of the Switch generation, wasn't really on the table anymore. Like a new 3D Zelda is obviously back on the table. A new IP from Monolith Soft is back on the table. Um, Again, a new Fire Emblem, stuff like that. New Captain Toad will be back on the table, I think, at some point this generation. But yeah, that is all I have for you all today. So I hope you all, like the bingo card that I made, and I will see you all in the next one, which will be. If you haven't watched my predictions video for the direct yet, feel free to watch that. But besides that, there will be a reaction to the direct tomorrow, which I'm very, very excited. But until then, I hope you all do makes you happy, because it rhymes with my previous name, Generic Happy, and we'll see you next one. Goodbye.